Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein. Welcome to Interior Design, The New Freedom. Today we'll be talking to Emilio Ambasz. Whether it's a Manhattan museum or a Brussels bank, architect, designer, curator Emilio Ambasz has a new way of solving existing problems. But I guess you've done that all of your life, Emilio. From what I understand, you came from your native Argentina in the early 60s to Princeton, New Jersey, where you received a bachelor's and a master's in architecture in something like 2 years. How did you manage that?
I was very lucky. I was taking courses in philosophy, Romance languages, and sociology, and I got 1A, 1+s in the examination. The professors were kind enough not to tell the dean of the college that I was writing my papers in Spanish.
Did you not speak English when you first came here?
I could read it. I could understand it. I couldn't write it.
Somehow it worked out very well and very quickly. Historically, architects and designers are part of a tradition where one is expected to take other work before being permitted the opportunity to design on a large or even a very small scale. Just what sort of work did you do to begin with?
Well, after finishing school, I stood in Princeton teaching, and I think the week I got a chair, I resigned and went to the Museum of Modern Art. I felt I was without any antecedents, so I was worthy of the position. And I acted as the curator of design from 1970 to 1976.
It was just about 10 years ago that you organized a major exhibition, which you called Italy, the New Domestic Landscape. It was a major exhibition that honored some quite remarkable works of design that were produced by modern Italian designers. I think you had 180 objects in 12 environments. On what basis did you choose, and what were some of the most remarkable designs that you selected at that point in time?
Well, to me the best, again, were the environments, not the objects. The objects in some way, there were some of them very accomplished aesthetically, some of them very interesting as cultural remarks on the cultural circumstances. But the most interesting were the environment. And Italian designers are very dexterous at coexisting with schizophrenia. They can perfectly well design golden ashtrays in the morning and go at night on television to denounce the consumer society that forces them to do it, and they can sleep later.
But you, like so many other people, have a particular admiration for Italian design. I wonder if you can tell us if you think that Italy is still producing the most advanced modern design, if it's cars or couches or taxis or tables. Do you think they still are the forerunners in terms of design?
In a certain way, I think that what it was once a very productive period of formal invention has now become a period of great attention to detail. So if one were to do an exhibition of design, it would be the Italian detail, or the detail, however you want to pronounce it, and whatever joke you want to make on that. They have turned details into the actual construction, and that is really their mastery has gone into that. There is not such a level of invention any longer, but there is now a great concern for the quality of production manufacturing, which didn't exist at the time. Demographically, Italy is still the outstanding locale, but there are signs, mainly Germany, a few very minor things in Japan, but not in consumer products, mainly in robots and in highly complex industrial products.
How do you explain all of that energy that goes into design in Italy, as contrasted to other
architects
societies?
Are unemployed, and that's one of the few ways where they can earn a living.
And there are more of them, aren't there?
There are plenty. Italy has schools of architecture in Florence, 5,000 students, in Rome, 7,000 students, and in Milan, about 4,000. There must be in this moment about 30 to 35,000 students of architecture, and that, I'm sure, will provide the best educated shoe salesman that Lumpen Intellectual has ever produced.
Another exhibition that you did at the Museum of Modern Art, your interests there were very wide-ranging, had to do with public transportation. And that particular exhibition was called the Taxi Project. Won't you tell us what your intent was there and how either Detroit or Fiat or the taxi industry responded to that exhibition?
We discovered that they provide about 40% of the mass transportation in many, many towns in the United States. So it wasn't a minor undertaking to try to design a better taxi. We wanted not only a taxi for the single individual passenger, we wanted a taxi capable of taking several passengers, like what I call a jitney cab. In order to develop the taxi, we work with the City Taxi and Limousine Commission in of New York in order to develop the program, and together with the Urban Mass Transportation Administration to design the program of what such a vehicle would be, which had to do with the design of a specially comfortable seat for the driver. The poor person sits there for 14 sometimes hours a day, so it had to be specially designed to take into account his bodily needs. It was also necessary to provide him with security in such a way that it would not create an anomic relation with the passenger. We wanted also to make it possible for him to open the doors, to say good morning to the passengers, to allow them to come in with the suitcases, all of that while sitting.
Well, how did the manufacturers, the government, and the drivers respond to your proposals?
Well, first, it was, of course, the right year to do it. It was the end of 1973, 1974. At that time, for example, Fiat had not sold one car in Germany during January of 1974. So with a splendid sense of timing, we went to visit them. And we found the European car manufacturers pretty open-minded because they were in a deep mess. We worked with Volvo, with Volkswagen, and later with Alfa Romeo. And I discovered that Volvo was pretty enlightened about that, and so was Volkswagen.
Was it your interest, in fact, and your research in that seating that led you, together with a very well-known Italian designer by the name of Giancarlo Piretti, together with him, and after extensive both vascular and orthopedic research into back disorders, you designed a prize-winning series of chairs, the Vertebra seating system, you call them. Is that what started that whole process? What made you design such a product?
I think that it all started in a very, like all those things, in a very different way. It started because I'm a very nervous sort, the sort that moves constantly, and I wanted a chair that would oppose me. So when I would push it, it would answer me back with a certain amount of rigor, but with a certain degree of kindness.
Am I correct, by the way, that that chair, without mechanical devices, adjusts to any seated position that tries to support the body in what is pretty close, and you notice how I'm straightening myself up, to an ideal posture, the kind of help that I think most of us can use. Is that the intent of the chair?
Yes, but in another way. There is no such a thing as an ideal posture. Ideal postures last 8 to 10 minutes. Then you're constantly fidgeting and changing positions. What we wanted is to do a chair that since you naturally will change positions because of blood circulation and pressure on several parts of the body, we wanted a chair that would change positions with you automatically, without having to push levers, buttons, or anything like that. It will be almost like a glove. If you relax, then the seat will move forward and the back tilts back. If you lean over a desk to right, then the chair will lean forward with you. And if you sit erect to receive somebody, you can do it. The chair will support you.
Well, how did you go about translating your idea for a chair into a reality? We've just heard you discuss several other projects, and there is a very big leap from the theoretical to the real.
Yes,
how did you manage to do that?
I first resigned from the museum, and that was a very real act. And so I could then dedicate to the work. And what I did is we set up with Piretti a partnership in Bologna, mainly because we have the very good craftsmen and engineers, and a certain attitude of the people who are very willing to try new things. And we went about in a way which is not a very common way. We designed the product, built prototypes, which gave us an aesthetic idea how the thing would look, then tested the mechanism separately, but then went one step further. Still on our own, without any manufacturer involved in that, we went ahead and we commissioned people to build the tools and the dies and all the machinery necessary to produce it. And 30 months after we started, and having done everything twice, we ended up having 209 molds and things like that. So we could then pick up the telephone and call a manufacturer, and I didn't have to listen to an engineer telling me that it cannot be made, or a marketing man saying it cannot be sold, or anything like that, because the chair was there, the tooling was there, we knew the cost quite precisely, and it was possible for them to start production within a normal period of about 60, 90 days from the moment they signed a contract.
In the end, when one talks about products, who determines, other than in the instance of the Vertebra seating system, but in reality, and for most designers, and I think perhaps yourself included, who determines what is designed? Is it really the designer? Is it the architect? Is it the consumer, the public that you are meant to serve and their needs, the corporation, the manufacturer, the government? Who really has the last word?
Most of those that you mentioned have the last word. In most cases, it's the manufacturer, the marketing conditions. The government is one form of manufacturer client, or many times as a client, they will aid manufacturing. Many times it also cultural differences between Europe and the United States. In the United States, the designer is usually in a very subservient situation in industry. He is usually called in once most of the important decisions have been taken by marketing. Once they know that chairs with 7 legs are selling very well, then they are called in to put on a shirt on that. In Europe, because designers have easier access to craftsmen, because the manufacturers are smaller in scale, and they know that they have to compete by quality of their products or the innovation of their product, it's easier for an architect or a designer to approach a manufacturer with an idea, which he usually will bring in the back of an envelope. That's why the industry of envelopes works for. And then the manufacturer will take the envelope and build a prototype in his own workshop, take the prototype, run with that to a photographer, have it photographed gloriously, run with the photographs on hand, drop them at a magazine, usually Domus, continue running to the airport, go to a furniture fair, sell 6,000 or 7,000 units, come back, tell his engineer that he has sold it, wait for the man when he gets out of the hospital, and then by hand...
just created is too realistic.
No, then by hand, they make the 6,000 pieces that look as if they were made by a machine. Then with the profits of that, they take to Switzerland. In the next year, they call the architect and ask him for bags of envelopes.
You said that your work as a museum curator, that experience when you were a professional collector of objects, acquainted you thoroughly with the complex functions and the intricate needs of museums. What in that role did you find that was particularly helpful now that you are assembling designs and buildings and even museums?
It's lighting. Lighting is the great secret of many exhibitions, not in painting where you want an even neutral type of lighting, but mainly the presentation of objects in order to provide drama, in order to accentuate some of the important features of the object without having to have labels. It is lighting conditions which are all important, as well as traffic. For example, the museum we had many times to have 600 to 800 people coming in at a relatively small room within a period of 1 hour, so it's a problem of getting them to move, to see, and not being disturbed too much. You have seen problems the museum had later with the Picasso show. It was a real problem.
If that's the case in museums, what would be the single most pressing problem in terms of interior design? Is it lighting as well? How important is that?
No, I don't think that you can put your finger on one point of interior design. I think that the concern for interior design, things of that nature, come from the fact that many people have realized that the degrees of freedom left are very few, and that therefore they're taking refuge in the interior, and that's where they believe that in some way they can enact personal dreams of one sort or another. So it is the interior as a dream place of one sort or another, either dreams to be self-presented or dreams to be presented to other people, which in some way has moved people to a concern for interiors. It is in some way a escapistic notion. It's very hard to change the outside context, so we retrench to our little garden.
So why don't we talk about the ideal for a moment? First in the workplace, then at home, and then in that kind of work situation, a factory situation.
There is no ready-made one single answer that can be given. We have found, for example, in the case of open offices, it was supposed to provide a great amount of freedom, of movement, of work arrangements. It only provided a tremendous amount of instability. People sneezing on one side got other ones cleaning their faces on the other side. The lack of psychological security, that if they went for a cup of coffee, they may come back and find that their two panels have been removed and they were somewhere else. In factories, of course, again, the process is the one that dictates the design. You cannot do an ideal design, but what we can do is analyze certain things which happen to every worker in a factory. As you know, most people have to work in positions which are very uncomfortable. They have to stand, and they have to many times work with their hands above their shoulders. We are now working a series of chairs that allow people to unload their weight on 3 legs rather than on 2 legs. That allows them the possibility of movement, and also in certain devices of presenting the products to them so that they do not have to raise their hands up. They can work with the things in front. These are very small, very minor indeed, kind of little miserable little improvements, but the ones that we can do from outside of the industry. For designers to intervene, we would require that either the industry or the unions, or even better, both together, realize that the work environment has to be improved. It's not only a matter of monthly pay, which of course is necessary, but it's also a matter of working conditions.
Somehow you managed to have a very creative design for the new home for the Museum of Folk Art right in Manhattan and at a very strategic location. Will you tell us what the real problem was there and some of the solutions that you have devised to deal with it, please?
Well, the main problem was that the museum has had about 20 years of working out of a small exhibition space on top of a sandwich place, and their career has been a very good one.
Sandwich shop, you mean?
Yes, yes. And it had a very good career. Their shows are very good, and lately the shows in the last few years have been very, very good indeed, and they've won a great amount of recognition. But the main problem in building a museum like that on 53rd Street, I thought, was the notion of creating a building which had a number of problems. One problem is that in order to make it possible, we had to build an office building, and it's the revenues of the office building or the arrangements of that office building that make it possible to build this museum. It's not too dissimilar from the circumstances of the modern
Which is
museum.
right up the street from it.
We are on the same sidewalk.
So you had multiple problems, both developing a new home for a new museum, its location, and to be both respectful of your neighbor with every urban and aesthetic amenity, but yet make a statement for this new institution. How'd you do that?
Well, first of all, in order to solve the problems of shadows, I put myself in their shadow. So I avoided the path of the sun. That was strategically enough. The other thing I did was we have offices. The offices do not look at the museum tower, so we avoid intervening into the privacy of the people who would be living in the towers. But the more important thing was I thought that we ought to reconstitute the scale of 53rd Street. So the building that I designed has a number of monumental stairways going into the museum itself, and a very theatrical, there's no other word of calling it, proscenium type of portal, which is 80 feet high, and those 80 feet pick up the height of the old Museum of Modern Art that the present architect has also respected and continued.
You have said that you are interested in discovery rather than recovery. Not only in the adaptive reuse of the federal courthouse in Grand Rapids, but the design that you created for a late 19th century bank building in Milan, the branch of Bank Lambert. And that is housed in this rather handsome structure that you have been very respectful of. And as I recall, you said, magic shows no stitches. How did you manage to do that?
Number one, it was not a very respectable building, but I treated her like one. And that was the way. It was a 19th century pastiche. It was a speculative type of building. When we got it, it was over-decorated. It was in such bad taste that I had no problem in getting the Fine Arts Commission to agree with me that we had to get rid of quite a few things. And once we got rid of cauliflower marble railings and other such things, what I did is I treated the building as it had been a grand piece of architecture. And because I had a terribly small budget, the bank Bruxelles Lambert will not be very happy, but I have to say it was a terribly small budget.
How small is small?
We did have 50 employees, and we had to give them telephones and furniture and rugs and painting and lighting and telex machines, and adorned their desks with ashtrays and quite a few things, and what I had for each of them would not be enough to send them to Rio and bring them back.
Per person, so you're talking about less than $200,000.
Yes, approximately that.
The building was decorated on the ground floor in a high Renaissance style. It was Mannerist on the mezzanine, and then it all seems to culminate in what was a very grand hall of mirrors on the top floor. Tell us how you redid that in terms of paint, in terms of light, the columns, how you separated the old from the new.
I think it's not a retail bank, it's a merchant bank, so people really go to the third floor to transact their business. The ground floor is a small space with a receptionist, the second floor is a bit larger, and the third one is the largest one. It's a capitalist pyramid inverted, if you want to imagine it in that way. But as you came inside, the quality of light was a very essential kind of heliotrope sensation of light, and that was achieved by painting the walls in a lilac color, a very strong one that almost had the bank into a nervous breakdown, and then covering it up with white paint, with a certain special paint that allowed the halogen lights that we used to come through them, pick up the lilac, and get it out into the air through the white. But when you looked at the wall, you would only see a white wall. But when you walked into the room, you would have a feeling of great luxury, mainly kind of this lilac color. As you went up, the amount of light became more intense. And then as you got up to the third floor where the actual credits were given, then I played up the Rococo golden and the gilded decorations quite highly. There's also much more light. You ascended actually to the bank heavens.
Two of your most recent projects have actually earned you a rather wide celebrity. In both instances, they are large, and in both instances, they are underground houses. One is in Spain, and one is in Belgium. You seem to be fascinated by excavating, Emilio. What is it about the subterranean life and the house as underneath shelter that prompts you to that solution?
I do not. I'm not interested in excavating. I'm interested in covering, in providing a roof. Since I cannot provide an ideal sky with clouds that don't rain and with sun that doesn't burn, I provide them with a roof which in some way is kept cool the whole year. The temperature is almost the same, 68 degrees approximately. So by using earth to cover the roof, I don't get variations. I get a great amount of savings and energy. I also have the advantage by that to obtain a seeming larger land. So you don't really have the house and the land separate. The two of them are intertwined. I use the land where it makes sense. In the case of Córdoba, it's a very dry and hot climate. The house went below ground because in the traditional Spanish house, most of the rooms, or usually the rooms, do not look out to the street. They look to a patio. So it didn't matter. In this case, the rooms look to a patio. So there's a patio where the rooms look into. It allowed me not to have air conditioning, noise and murmurs of equipment and breakdowns and all the rest of that. It was also much more economical to be done. So there are a number of facts of that nature. It's also a desire to do an architecture which in some way utilizes agricultural or technological elements which are not the traditional ones of architecture in order to obtain an architectural expression.
Can you describe its exterior and also how you related, I guess, the problem that has faced architects and designers since the beginning of their history, and that is how you relate the exterior to the interior?
This specific one had in reality two walls, which in plan would give an L shape. The two walls were just like that. And as you approached them, the entrance would be at the corner of the L's. There was a balcony which came out from a demolition of an old house in Córdoba. I'm sorry, I didn't say the house is in Córdoba, Spain. And then you enter to the corner. But if you turn around, you would see that from the other side, the house was really just a mask. And the house was in reality opening up onto a patio, which was here defined by the two planes. There is no interior, there is no exterior. That's one way to get rid of a very difficult problem. Scamotage.
You mentioned before your interest in the fusion of nature and technology. You've used that as well in resolving a housing situation for Mexican farm workers in a system that I believe you call Agritecture. Can you tell us what you did and what you mean by that?
It is a specific project for 9 families. They are Chicanos. And they bought land in Borrego Springs in Southern California, not very good land. They bought it with a state grant. That may explain it. America has made great contributions to surrealism, but bureaucracy, American at least, has made the greatest. And those people had to grow grapes there. So they approached the University of Southern California, where they met with people who are acquainted with agricultural techniques, and someone I knew, whom I had commented sometime that it would be nice to have a living condition under a grapevine. And it's done in, you have grapevines which are elevated usually on poles about 12, 14 feet high, and then with wires, and then the grapes grow up in 3-4 years, and they are suspended, and the leaves cast a shadow so the sun doesn't burn the grapes. So I thought that gives a very beautiful quality of light. It's a very economical way of providing shadows, and it would be very beautiful for those people to live under their grapeyards. So what I suggested to them is that they move their trailer houses, and in order to define their own territory, each of the family's territories, I used hedges. So hedges grew up that defined each of the family's territories. There were 9 families, so I made it like 9 squares with 2 streets crossing each other, almost like a little Spanish pueblo. So culturally, we respected that type of pattern. In addition to that, I became a little bit maniacal. I said I wasn't going to use bricks and nails nor anything man-made. Everything had to grow. The didactic exasperation was carried out sometimes, I think, too far. But I designed for them a chapel, and the chapel is excavated into the earth. This is a case of real excavation into the earth. It's open to the sky, but it's a stepped section into the earth until they reach the water level, and it's in the water level. Once they found it, there's where the cross gets placed.
To give some idea of your diversity, not only have you designed that sort of thing, you have also done interiors very beautiful and what have been described as almost cool and suave interiors for the top floor of a townhouse in Manhattan's East 70s. That's quite a contrast.
How do I reconcile it?
Yes.
There was a very simple situation. Again, it was designed for someone. And for that someone, I thought, needed serenity, tranquility, and a certain degree of, and kind of, I don't mean purification is not the right word, a certain degree of removing oneself from daily concerns.
A private place is really what you mean.
A private place for someone not very private, somebody who likes to have people around. But in some way, it would be a situation where it's a lady, she can be alone. And it's a great collector of paintings, and there I didn't allow any paintings to be there, and we all agreed, she agreed with me, we shouldn't have it.
Well, most of us are not quite that fortunate. Assuming that there just isn't enough money to do everything, how do you recommend that people begin the long process of furnishing a house or an apartment? Should a couple of good pieces of furniture come first? Should the place be left bare except for one marvelous rug or one beautiful object? Do you start with paintings, lamps, rugs, lighting? How would you suggest that someone does begin?
I would suggest they move in at night. They play Opus 124 by Beethoven, the benediction of the house. They sit perhaps on a rock, so they create a magic territory, so they can in some way exorcise the devil out of the house or the past tenant, and they slowly add elements, slowly. I am not for too many things. I would rather err. I would also suggest they make immense closets so they can hide all their mistakes. Closets, like mothers, can forgive anything.
You've been a wonderful guest, Emilio Ambasz, and you've made it quite clear that your view of architecture and design is very broad. For sharing some of your concerns about housing, about design, in fact, some of your philosophy as well, and in such a generous way. Our thanks to you. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Interior Design, The New Freedom, and thank you for being with us, too. Thank you, Emilio.